Hey everybody, the next project on my 1966 Lincoln Continental is going to be cleaning some of the engine parts. Last week I picked up some parts from the engine builder, including things like the valve covers, intake manifold, oil pan, valley pan, as well as a bunch of hardware. So now it's time to clean many of these parts up in preparation for paint. And so I'm going to go through the processes that I go through for cleaning these parts and prepping them for paint, which include things like soaking them in Evapo-Rust overnight or using an ultrasonic cleaner, which I'll be using for the first time on parts. So let's go ahead and get started.
Now for this restoration, the goal is to clean original hardware and cast parts thoroughly without blasting, grinding, damaging threads, sealing surfaces, or castings. So the idea is really to let chemistry and time do the work instead of abrasion. And as you can see, about half of the parts will fit into the ultrasonic cleaner. I have in there right now the oil filter housing, as well as some intake bolts and hardware, and some valve cover bolts and hardware. And the ultrasonic cleaning process is going to provide a mechanical action through cavitation, which really helps clean inside threads and seams and any blind holes that can't be reached by hand. All right, here are all the chemicals that I'm going to be using for this cleaning process. And I'm going to take a little bit of time here to explain all of them so that it makes sense. Now for rust removal, I'm going to be using Evapo-Rust, straight, no dilution. It's not acidic, it's safe for steel and cast iron, and it won't attack good metal or threads. And parts that do fit inside of the ultrasonic cleaner typically run 20 to 30 minutes per cycle with no added heat. The cavitation process itself provides enough warmth. And then the larger parts that don't fit inside of the Viver tank, which is 30 liters, are going to be soaked in straight Evapo-Rust, and usually probably about overnight, so probably about 24 hours. Now, if the parts were pretty greasy, I would be using Simple Green HD. And again, that's going to be optional for you. It depends on where your parts are in the process. And typical ratios are 1:1 for heavy degreasing, 1:3 for general cleaning, and probably about 1:10 for light cleaning. But again, in this case, since the degreasing was already done, I'm skipping that step. Now, after the rust removal, everything's going to go back into the ultrasonic cleaner with clean tap water and a single drop of Dawn. Now, this step isn't for degreasing. It's just to break surface tension and help remove any remaining Evapo-Rust residue from the threads and any crevices. And this is the one step where I do want to use heat, since warm water helps the soap work and improves flushing. And then after that, the parts will get a thorough rinse under just regular tap water. And since I'm not using heat or compressed air for drying, I'm going to dry everything using rubbing alcohol. Now, the alcohol will help displace any water from the threads, the passages, any blind holes, and it helps evaporate quickly, which prevents any flash rust. Now, one exception is going to be my intake manifold. It's really too large for the ultrasonic cleaner, so it's going to get that overnight soak in Evapo-Rust, as I mentioned. But I'm also going to follow that by an overnight soak in Pine Sol, and that's going to really help clean the internal passages and any remaining residue. And then after that, I'm going to follow the same rinse and alcohol drying steps. Now, if the parts are being painted the same day, you could go straight to paint, but mine are going to be painted later. So I'm actually going to apply just a very light mist of WD-40, and I'm going to wipe it almost dry. And then I'm going to bag the parts, probably with a paper towel, to buffer humidity. Now, this process will actually end up taking longer than blasting, but it's going to preserve the original hardware and castings and give predictable, repeatable results without removing material. Now here's the setup of my parts inside of the ultrasonic cleaner. So you'll see that I have the basket in here, and each part is separated, so not one part or piece of hardware is touching the other. And then I have a little gap here where I'm going to be able to pour the Evapo-Rust, and hopefully none of the parts, especially these washers, move. First, we're going to turn on the main power button right underneath the power cord. All right, now to the front. The left-hand controls are for the heat, but I already mentioned we're not going to be heating on this cycle, so you can see that the light for on is off. And we're going to set the right side timing to 30, which it's already at, and now we're just going to turn this on. Great, we've completed one full cycle of the Evapo-Rust inside of the ultrasonic cleaner for 30 minutes, and we're now going to drain the Evapo-Rust out. Now, Evapo-Rust is reusable, so you could drain that right back into the 5-gallon jug that it comes in, Or in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drain it into this plastic container that's holding the timing chain cover, and I'm going to let that soak for the next 24 hours. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the power on the back, and I'm going to lift out the basket so I can rinse out the ultrasonic cleaner. And unfortunately, a few of my washers ended up coming out through the basket. The ultrasonic cleaner is now filled with tap water. As you can see from the color, it still looks like the Evapo-Rust. So we're going to go ahead and drain that out and try and get out all the residual Evapo-Rust. And now at this point, the rust is gone. So the next step is just a short ultrasonic rinse to flush out anything that's left in the threads, seams, or tight areas before drying. And now I'm just going to add a single drop of Dawn, and this isn't for degreasing, this is just to help the water flow and carry residue out of those tight areas. So this time I'm going to use heat just to warm the water, and as you can see I'm setting it to about 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, which equates to about 120 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm going to run this for 5 minutes, and that's really all that's needed to flush out any remaining residue before everything comes out for rinsing and drying. With the ultrasonic rinse now complete, we're going to take these out, and I'm going to run these under the water faucet off screen, and then we'll go straight to the alcohol dry and then prep this for storage since it'll be about a week before I can paint these. All right, off screen, I completed that water rinse, but I noticed after doing so that some of the paint was flaking off some of these parts. So I went through and did a quick acetone wipe, got everything to a point where there's no more flaking paint, then re-rinsed it. And we're now to the point where we can spray this down with alcohol to dry. Then we're gonna do a light mist and wipe down with WD-40, and we're then gonna store these parts. All right, a light oiling's been added for humidity protection, and the paper towel in the bag is to absorb any moisture. So let's go check on that timing cover that was soaking in the Evapo-Rust overnight. Great. This is now ready for a water rinse, and then we'll dry it off with alcohol. We won't need to do WD-40 on this given it's aluminum, and that can be stored both clean and dry. All right, so far we haven't had to do any degreasing, but I did find a few parts that still have some light grease on them. So for this batch, we are going to run a degreaser through the ultrasonic. And in this group, I have a series of parts, which include the transmission support, the oil pan bolts and brackets. It also includes the oil pump and oil filter boss bolts, the oil filter cap, and the valley pan filter. And I'm going to use Simple Green, and I'm going to use the Simple Green HD mixed at 1 part Simple Green to 5 parts water, which is just enough to cut the grease before moving it on to the rust removal. All right, for degreasing, I'm going to warm the solution slightly, about 110 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly between 43 to 55 Celsius. I'm going to put it at 49, which is 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to run this for about 10 minutes. And that is enough to break down the grease without really overdoing it. With those parts now done, let's work on some of these bigger parts that could not fit into the ultrasonic cleaner, including this intake manifold. And so we're going to do a 24-hour soak in Evapo-Rust, 12 hours each side. All right, with the 24-hour soak in Evapo-Rust complete, I'm now going to tape off the plenum using foil tape, and I'm going to do a couple layers of that so I prevent it from leaking. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to pour Pine Sol at a 1-to-1 ratio with water into the runners. And I'm going to soak this for between 12 and 24 hours to really get the inside of the intake cleaned up.
As you saw in the introduction, my original intent was just to show the cleaning of the engine parts prior to primer and paint. However, I've decided to actually add in the process of primering and painting these parts into this one video. I did put that text overlay letting you know the time lapse will show up at the end, which it will. However, for now, I want to pause here as I want to go through which supplies I'm going to be using for the primering and painting process.
In all my time working on cars, I've never hand painted anything on a car. However, in my research, trying to find the right color of blue for the 462 MEL motor, I found that Bill Hirsch's engine enamel, which is called the Ford Medium Blue, is the closest you can get to the original blue that was on this engine. And they also recommend hand painting it using paintbrushes. Again, something I've never done before. And because I'm going to be hand painting the blue paint, I've decided that I'm also going to hand paint the primer. So I've picked up a can of Rust-Oleum Rusty Metal Primer, and of course the can of the Bill Hirsch paint. And then I have a series of paint brushes. So the 3 larger ones are just natural bristle brushes, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, and 2 inch. And then I have a couple of fine detail brushes for some of the smaller pieces. And so the plan now is to do 2 coats of primer and 1 to 2 coats of paint. And so I'm going to do that over time lapse starting now.
Great, priming is now done. We're now moving over to the Hirsch enamel paint, but I'm going to be changing the paint brushes. And that's because those natural brushes I was using earlier, they were lower quality, so bristles were coming out as I was painting. And that's if you saw that overlay where it said using gray Scotch-Brite off screen, that was to get the bristles out of the primer between coats. So what I've done is I got the same size brushes, but I got synthetic brushes, and I also got a pack of foam brushes. So those are the brushes that I'm gonna be using. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to heat the paint. So traditional paints that you use nowadays, low solids and low cure time. However, this Hirsch enamel is high solids and has a high cure time of between 24 to 48 hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat it up to about 37, 38 degrees Celsius, 98 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's going to help thin the actual paint. That's going to help with flow, brushability, and allow overall spread of the actual paint and prevent you from seeing as many brush marks as possible. So let's jump into this part of the project now.
And here's the finished product. After a 14-day cure period, these are all now ready to be boxed up and taken back to the engine builder. And yes, you will notice that I did sneak in a yellow piece here that I didn't show on the video for being painted, but that is now completed as well.
That now completes the cleaning, priming, and painting of all of the parts that I picked up from the engine builder. Now I do want to talk about the quality of the paint. I did intentionally not spray paint these. I hand painted them. Now, if I was to spray paint them, you would have seen a high gloss, you would have seen a high shine. You're not going to get that with this. Because I hand painted it, it does add a little bit of texture to it, so it has a little bit more of a dull finish, and you can actually see the lines from when we painted it. And that's how it was in 1966. All of these motors were hand painted for production, not for show quality. And that is exactly the type of finish that I want to maintain, because I am restoring this car to be a true OEM authentic build. So stay tuned for more content on the restoration of my 1966 Lincoln Continental. And the next video will be actually now painting both the block and heads that I just picked up from the engine builder as well. Thanks, guys.